The wind moved like a whisper through the desert canyons of Arizona, brushing over the broken remnants of campfires and the fading scent of smoke. The evening sun had dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of blood and gold as silence stretched over the land. Silence heavy enough to carry memories of war and loss. Among the crumbling stones of an abandoned fort, a young Apache girl named Nayeli sat close to a dying ember, her eyes reflecting the distant light. She had been captured weeks ago during a raid gone wrong, and though her wrists were free now, the invisible chains of mistrust bound her far tighter than any rope. She heard the sound of boots on gravel and looked up sharply, half expecting the officer again. But it was only one man, a soldier younger than most, his uniform dusty, his rifle slung loosely at his side. His name was Carter, a man whose hands had seen battle, but whose heart seemed unwilling to keep fighting. "I brought you food," he said quietly, setting a tin plate near her feet. She didn't move at first, eyes narrowed, the pride of her people still alive behind her silence. "I assumed we were going to be alone," she murmured after a moment, her voice carrying the edge of suspicion. Carter swallowed hard, unsure whether she spoke in fear or defiance. He sat down across from her, careful not to cross the invisible line between them. "You are," he said, "at least for now." The word "now" trembled in the space between them like a promise and a threat at once. The desert was vast enough to swallow secrets, but inside that ruined fort, both of them carried enough ghosts to fill the canyon. Carter looked at her hands, calloused but graceful, the hands of someone who once gathered herbs and fed children, not someone who'd been forced to run, fight, and survive. He tried to speak, to say something that might bridge the gulf between captor and captive, but the wine took his words before they could form. Nayeli studied him with quiet precision. Every soldier she'd met had eyes that hid cruelty, but his were tired, almost regretful. When he finally said, "You don't have to be afraid," she didn't answer. Fear, to her, was not something she admitted, it was something she wore like armor. Hours passed. The stars came out, fierce and cold above them. Carter lit another small fire, knowing that in the desert, the cold could kill faster than a bullet. He offered her a blanket, and she accepted it with slow, reluctant hands. When he turned away to look at the horizon, she spoke again so softly that he almost missed it. "Why are you kind to me?" He thought about it for a long moment before replying. "Because I've seen what unkindness does." She looked down, eyes burning, as if remembering the faces of her people, those who hadn't survived. The desert felt heavier now, filled with things neither of them could say. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried. The soldier glanced toward the sound instinctively, then froze as he heard another noise behind him, the unmistakable clatter of boots and gear. Nayeli tensed instantly. Carter rose, hand on his rifle. From the shadows emerged three figures, their uniforms faintly visible under the moonlight. "Evening, Corporal," one of them drawled. "Didn't know you had company." Nayeli's heart pounded. Her words cut through the air like the crack of a whip. "I assumed we were going to be alone." The soldiers exchanged glances, smirking as if they understood something Carter didn't. He stood his ground, eyes narrowing. "Orders changed," one of them said. "Captain wants her moved by dawn." Carter didn't like the tone. "She's not ready for that," he replied. "The captain said she's to be taken south." "That's the order." The leader stepped forward, voice hard. "You got a problem following orders, Carter?" The young soldier's jaw tightened. He could feel Nayeli's eyes on him, filled with mistrust, but also something else, an unspoken plea for dignity, for protection, for one man to stand between her and the cruelty she feared was coming. "I'll take her," he said firmly. "No need for anyone else to get involved." The others laughed. "You getting soft?" one sneered. "Or just attached?" Carter's silence was answer enough. The night deepened, and the air grew colder, but the tension burned like fire. The three soldiers lingered, their jokes sharp as knives, until one of them finally spat on the ground and turned away. "Fine, lover boy. Have it your way. But when the captain asks, don't say we didn't warn you." They disappeared into the dark, their laughter fading into the wind. Carter turned back to Nayeli, who had not moved. Her eyes glistened in the flickering firelight, half fury, half confusion. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you shouldn't have to be alone with men like that," he said simply. She turned away, her shoulders trembling though her voice remained steady. "You think I need saving?" "No," he answered. "I think I need reminding of what kind of man I am." The silence that followed was long and heavy. The wind carried the smell of rain, rare in this desert, but it felt as though the heavens were holding their breath. In the dim light, Naeli began to hum a song older than the stones, older than the war that had brought them here. Carter listened without understanding the words but feeling every note as it sank into the dust, and his chest alike. For the first time in months, the ache in him softened. When the fire finally burned low, he stood and said, "We leave at sunrise." She nodded once. The distance between them was still wide, but it was no longer unreachable. As dawn broke, painting the fort in pale light, Carter watched her stand tall, proud, unbroken. She met his gaze one last time before stepping into the desert path. In that glance, something passed between them, not forgiveness, not trust, but the faint beginning of both. And though the horizon stretched endless and uncertain ahead, Carter felt a strange peace settle in his. "They're fighting for," he answered. Bullets tore through the air, sparks leaping off stone. Carter fired again, grazing one of the pursuers, but he knew they were outnumbered. The end was closing in. Then Naeli reached into the dust, drawing something, a symbol, circular and intricate. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Calling for balance," she said. The wind rose suddenly, carrying a howl that seemed almost human. Sand spiraled upward, blinding the soldiers. Carter didn't believe in magic, but he'd stopped questioning the impossible long ago. He grabbed her hand, and they ran again, through the storm, until the sound of the soldiers faded into the roar of the wind. When the dust settled, they stood at the edge of a canyon. A narrow path wound down between sheer cliffs. "We'll rest below," Carter said. Naeli nodded, exhausted, but as they descended, she stumbled. He caught her before she fell, his arm around her shoulders. For the first time, she didn't pull away. "If they catch us," she whispered, "what will you say?" Carter looked at her, the fire in her eyes, the quiet dignity she carried like armor, and answered, "That I found something worth fighting for." She closed her eyes, tears mixing with dust. Beneath the canyon's shadow, they found a cave carved by centuries of wind. It smelled of rain and iron. They built a small fire, shared silence, and waited for fate to find them. By nightfall, the sound of horses returned. Carter stood, weapon ready, as three figures appeared on the ridge above. The leader, the same soldier who'd mocked him, shouted, "You think you can hide from the army?" His voice echoed like thunder. Carter shouted back, "The army forgot what justice is." A shot rang out, hitting the rock near his head. He ducked, returned fire. The battle was short but brutal. One of the soldiers fell. Another retreated, wounded. The last, the leader, took aim again. But Naeli stepped into view, holding a torch. "Leave him," she cried in perfect English. The man hesitated, his rifle trembling. For a moment, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Carter fired. The echo rolled through the canyon like a storm, and the last soldier dropped. Silence, the kind that comes after endings. Carter's chest heaved. His hands trembled. Naeli stared at him, then at the fallen man. "It's over," she said. He shook his head slowly. "Nothing's ever over," he whispered. "But maybe now we can start again." They buried the soldiers beneath the sand, marking the graves with stones, not as enemies, but as men lost to the same world that had nearly destroyed them. As dawn broke again, Carter and Naeli stood side by side at the canyon's edge, the wind wrapping around them like a promise. "Where will you go now?" she asked. "Wherever you go," he replied simply. She turned to look at him fully, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she smiled, not faintly this time, but wide, free, alive. Together, they walked into the morning light. Chest, behind them, the fort crumbled slowly back into silence, as if it, too, knew that some ghosts were finally ready to rest. And so began their journey south, two souls bound not by duty or captivity, but by the fragile thread of understanding in a world that had forgotten mercy. The desert woke slowly beneath a pale gold sun, its dunes stretching like sleeping giants across the endless horizon. Carter walked ahead, his rifle slung behind him, while Naeli followed at a quiet distance, her bare feet tracing soft patterns in the dust. The world was silent, except for the wind and the faint whisper of her song from the night before. They had been walking for hours, the old fort now a distant ghost behind them. But the memory of what had happened still clung to both of them like the scent of smoke. Carter's mind ran in circles, every step echoing with the question of what he was becoming. A soldier who disobeyed orders was a dead man walking. But something about the way she looked at him made him believe that disobedience, for once, was the only path worth taking. By midday, the heat turned merciless. They found shade beneath a rocky overhang where an ancient stream had once cut through the stone, leaving a shallow hollow cool enough to breathe. Nayeli crouched near the wall, tracing old markings carved by her people generations ago. "My father told me the desert remembers," she said softly. "Every footprint, every battle, every lie." Carter nodded, though he couldn't see what she saw. "Then maybe it'll remember what we do today," he said. They shared the last of their water, and for the first time, she smiled, not fully, but enough for him to see the woman behind the fear. It was a fragile peace, one that lasted only until a sound shattered the silence, the distant crack of a rifle. Carter froze, the echo carried on the wind, followed by the faint shimmer of movement across the dunes. Dust clouds, too uniform to be nature, soldiers, his own. "They've come," Nayeli whispered. Carter's hand went to his weapon instinctively, but he knew it was useless. 3 men could chase them down easily in open country. "We have to move," he said. They ran, the ground burning underfoot, the sun hammering their backs. The world blurred into heat and dust, but they didn't stop. The sound of horses drew closer, hooves drumming against the sand like thunder. Carter turned, raised his rifle, and fired a single shot. One horse stumbled, its rider thrown. The others scattered momentarily, buying them precious seconds. Nayeli darted behind a cluster of boulders, heart pounding. "You could leave me," she said between breaths. "They would take you back." He shook his head. "Not anymore." The soldiers circled the rocks, voices barking orders. Carter reloaded, his hands steady though his heart raged. Nayeli crouched beside him, her dark hair whipping in the wind. "Why risk your life?" she asked. "Because I'm tired of taking orders from men who've forgotten what." The desert glowing with a quiet kind of peace, and as the horizon swallowed them, the world seemed to breathe again. 2 souls who refused to be broken, leaving behind the noise of war for the stillness of understanding.